Welcome to the final round of the 2026 Oratorical Contest of the Battle of Flowers. I'm Elizabeth Hetrick, and it has been my pleasure to serve as this year's Vice President of the Oratorical and to work with a dedicated group of ladies to bring you today's competition. In accordance with our contest rules, the afternoon speeches are presented in reverse order from the morning presentations. Here are the finalists and the order in which they will present. Ethan Montez, Callie Leverett, Matthew Marquez, August Vinson, and Annette Adoyobo. We will now begin the final round with a new panel of distinguished judges who will be introduced to you at the conclusion of this round. As a reminder, contest rules dictate that each speech should be original, historically accurate, between 10 and 12 minutes in length, and delivered fully and completely by memory with the intent to inform and educate the audience. There will be a short pause between speeches so that we can provide our judges with a little bit of time to record their assessments of the contestant. Judges, if you will please indicate to me when you are ready to proceed by raising your paddles. Between contestants, if the audience will please speak only in whispers, and we ask that no one exit or enter this room except during the 3-minute pause between the speeches. Now I would ask you all to please take a moment to check your cell phone. Make sure it is either off or on silent, especially if you have any alarms set. Thank you so much. Contestants, are you ready to begin? Our first speaker is Ethan Montez, and the title of his speech is A Court of Conviction.
There's a common story in the litany of Texas literature that speaks of Moses Austin. He had money, he had connections, and what seemed most important, a land grant signed by the governor himself. In 1821, he set out to start a colony in Texas, government approved and fully legal. But on his way back to Missouri, he was accompanied by a man he believed to be his friend, someone he trusted. But that man robbed him. In a tale as old as time, betrayal was a common currency out west. He was left without his horse, food, gun, and dignity. Walking for more than a week with nothing but his own tenacity, he finally made his way back into Louisiana. Witnesses said he looked more dead than alive. In an endless terrain of cattle drives, border expansion, and railroad, it's easy to see the Hollywood tropes of barroom brawls and stories like that of Austin. We say that the West was lawless. No rules, no order, no diplomacy, just cowboys and chaos. But that story isn't quite right. Texas had law. It just wasn't coming from a government 1,000 miles away. A signature could not protect you, and the government's words were just that, words. People didn't sit around waiting. They figured it out. And one man figured it out better than anybody else. He donned the name, the law west of the Pecos. Fantley Roy Bean, more commonly known as Judge Roy Bean, was not a scholar. He wasn't a lawyer either, and he was barely a judge. His past was as violent as the area around him, and he was simply a survivor of the times. Actually, before he had ever presided over a single case, he had survived the kind of life that should have killed most men, frankly, me included. In fact, according to many records of the time, he'd killed at least 2 men in duels before ever even finding himself in Texas. For most of his adult life, he wore a thick beard, not for style, but to hide the jagged scar on his neck left by a hangman's rope. In San Gabriel, California in 1854, after killing a Mexican officer in a duel over a woman, the dead man's friends put Bean on a horse, tied a noose around his neck, and left him. But the bride, who had been hiding behind a tree nearby, cut him down. The rope stretched and thin, but the horse never bolted, and so Bean lived on. The mark remained, and with it a permanently stiff neck for the rest of his days, and a constant reminder of the lawlessness he would later be tasked with taming. In 1882, Bean found himself in a very small, violent corner of West Texas. This region was in crisis. It was dominated by over 8,000 laborers, gamblers, and ruffians. The closest courthouse was 120 miles away in Fort Stockton, and the Texas Rangers needed a local justice of the peace in order to eliminate the 400-mile round trip required to bring prisoners to trial. A manageable journey today, but back then was a whole lot longer. And such, the Rangers appointed him the justice of the peace, as Moses proved us, a provably thin credential, but a real one nonetheless. And what followed was justice the only way you can make it in a place like that, through an iron fist and the willingness to show up with fervor. To understand the way that Bean's justice worked, you would only have to take one step inside the Jersey Lily, his saloon courtroom amalgam that was named after a British actress for whom he had a very strong and strange affinity for. Unfortunate enough to find yourself facing charges, you would sit on a whiskey barrel while the honorable court offered a round of drinks to open its proceedings. His rulings flowed as quickly and easily as the beer which he provided to his patrons. But nothing encapsulates Bean more than what happened on February 21st, 1896, when he hosted the World Heavyweight Boxing Championship on a sandbar in the middle of the Rio Grande. This requires some context. 4 years earlier, the Texas legislature had banned prize fighting. And so places like Arkansas threatened to put promoters in the state penitentiary. The Mexican government even sent 150 soldiers, and the US government sent marshals to stop it. With every government in reach lined up to say no to this, to put a stop to it, none other than Bean said yes. And so he quietly told promoters to get on the train and meet him in Langtree, where he had built a boxing ring on a sandbar, just across the river from Mexico, just beyond the jurisdiction of every soldier, marshal, and officer who had traveled hundreds of miles to stop him. He found a loophole. The Rangers stood on the edge of the rim of the canyon and watched, rendered completely ineffective. I like to imagine that they were jealous of how free Bean seemed to be. In a 95-second match, Mayer was knocked unconscious, and the new heavyweight boxing champion was donned on a strip of foreign land to all in which Roy Bean found the only square mile on earth where no government's writs could reach him. The standing justice of the peace had just hosted one of the most illegal sporting events in the history of North America, all without breaking a single law he was obligated to enforce. Think on that for a moment. The man whose job was to embody the law, fruitfully and unabashedly, found the precise seam where it came apart, and through that seam brought a huge boxing ring and 10 rail cars full of people. Perhaps his most famous ruling shows the kind of pragmatism that Bean operated under. When he found a man, a dead traveler, with $40 and a pistol in his pockets, instead of concern himself with probate laws or search and seizure protocols, he simply fined the man $40 for concealed carry of a weapon, pocketed the money, and moved on. As witty as it was prejudicial, it worked. In all of its theatrics, he kept the peace. And this gets to a crucial detail about Bean that often gets lost in the colorful anecdotes of this time. You see, Bean's justice was imperfect, absolutely. But it was better than the alternative. There was no marble courthouse with due process and constitutional protections. There was mob violence and lynchings that left destitute bodies swinging from trees. Bean, through all of his eloquent speeches of righteous condemnation, he sentenced dozens to the gallows to be hung, but commuted every single sentence, refusing to ever actually hang anyone. He took the law into his own hands to stop those much worse from doing so, and by doing that, he created a land that was devoid of the vigilante violence that plagued so many parts of this country, and especially the West. But that comfortable part of the story has to end. Bean was not perfect. When a Chinese man, a railroad worker, one of the thousands who had broken his body laying tracks across the Chihuahuan Desert and even near here in San Antonio, was killed, Bean refused to hold any charges against the Irishman, the defendant, because he could find no charge against killing a Chinaman. As we see in history, we often want to tuck anecdotes like this into the footnotes about the prejudices of the era and move on. But that does such a disservice to the importance of this era. Bean's famous mercy the one that stopped him from hanging people, was not universal. It was selective and extended only to those whose humanity he chose as worthy. And Chinese laborers, Mexicans, and many women as well did not qualify. The same man who had survived the hangman's rope and who felt he could not impose death on another person had no such compunction in this moment. This is not just a slight on Bean. I think this is a slight on how justice works in not just this state, but this country. For many throughout history, they see that order and inclusion often don't align in their eyes. And in this uncomfortable truth is, I think, where everything about justice is found. You see, whether we like to admit it or not, legislatures consistently push out laws that selectively serve their constituents. Personal conviction is brought to the bench every single day. The difference between Bean ripping out a page of the book and legislature just quietly repealing protections and refusing to grant rights is ultimately a lot closer than we feel comfortable recognizing. You see, Bean had very little constitutional legitimacy, clearly, but he had social legitimacy. He was accepted, reelected, and embraced until he eventually retired in 1902. This man was something special and representative of Texas. Historians like to say that west of the Pecos, there is no law, and west of El Paso, there is no God. And they may be right about that. But that wasn't quite true in Texas. Texas had law, it had justice, and it had order. It just wasn't institutional identity. But Bean was codifying that identity every single day in the Jersey Lily. Faced with a vacuum of authority, he saw a space and he filled it. He seized it, not because some distant government gave him permission, but because he was willing. How often do we see a void in our own life and stand at its edge, waiting for someone else to fill it, waiting for permission to act? The Texas spirit is not in that waiting. It's the conviction to raise the building yourself, even if you have to do it with just some whiskey barrels and a ripped up book. I think Bean was as far from a lawmaker as he really was from a lawbreaker. But in that balance, he became quintessentially Texan. In the wild environment in which Bean was placed, the Wild West, Bean revealed justice for what it truly is in this state: human, imperfect, and larger than any institution could ever contain. Thank you.
Our second speaker is Callie Leverett, and the title of her speech is The Santa Claus Bank Robbery: How St. Nick Made the West Texas Naughty List.
I never really believed in Santa growing up. The milk, the cookies, the notes from Santa that look suspiciously like my mother's handwriting, yeah, I never bought it. But I have to admit, if I had seen Santa himself strolling down the street, I might have changed my mind. For folks in Cisco, Texas, on December 23rd in 1927, Santa did actually come to town. Now, whether that ruins their perception of old St. Nick and the Christmas spirit, well, that's definitely up for debate. Texas in the 1920s is not the Texas we know today. Its economy was rapidly fluctuating and families were swarming to oil-booming towns. Stories from Hilton says that Conrad Hilton purchased his first hotel in Cisco in 1919, marking the start of the great Hilton Hotel empire. Cisco lies just west of Ranger, where the American Oil and Gas Historical Society noted the world-famous Ranger oil field boom took place in 1917. And so aspiring millionaires soon overwhelmed the little town of Ranger as well as the nearby Cisco. Meanwhile, crime was on an uptick, and Texas was overrun with bank robberies. The Texas Historical Foundation says that the state averaged around 3 to 4 per day. So in a desperate response to stifle this robbery epidemic, the Texas Bankers Association created an award to grant any citizen $5,000 for killing a bank robber. A whopping $85,000 in today's money. Imagine in 2026 coming across a flyer of an $85,000 reward for killing someone. But back then this was entirely normal, and it fueled a frenzy. Everyone wanted that money. This bounty was the snowball at the top of the mountain that avalanched West Texas into a society where those lines of justice were increasingly blurred. And this is the start of our story. Let's go back to 1927 to the story of a particularly important little girl, Frances Blassingame. According to Texas Highways, Frances was so excited over Santa that it actually threw a wrench into our Christmas story. On December 23rd, Frances and her mother needed to run some errands, so they headed into town. The streets of Cisco were busy with shoppers. It is 2 days before Christmas, after all. Holding her mother's hand, Frances catches sight of a jolly figure in the corner of her eye. Is that Santa? He's slipping to the bank across the street. She begs her mom, "We have to follow him." Unfortunately for Frances, this is no festive visit. It's the start of one of the most chaotic crimes in Texas history. Our Santa Claus in this story, Marshall Ratliff, was no saint. He was living in Wichita Falls on parole for having robbed a bank in Valera. He was pardoned by the Texas governor, Ma Ferguson, after only being in jail for 1 year. Ratliff had a second chance at freedom. So what does he do? A new reformed life. No, he decides to go for round 2. According to Texas Escapes, Ratliff actually grew up in Cisco. So choosing Cisco was strategic. It was economically booming from oil, and he knew the atmosphere and the people. Except that atmosphere and those people knew him too. So he was going to need an inconspicuous disguise. And it hits him. It's Christmas time. Santa Claus. Who would ever suspect the most joyful, merry, and bright man of them all? Santa Ratliff recruited 3 elves, Henry Helms, Robert Hill, and Louis Davis. The 4 men set off from Wichita Falls to Cisco, not for a hometown visit, but to rob the First National Bank, with high hopes for a successful heist. On that fateful day in 1927, the gang drove in and dropped Ratliff off a couple blocks away. According to Dwayne Hale, a Cisco historian at the Lila Latch Lloyd Museum, kids initially flocked behind him. Later, Ratliff met his crew in an alley and stormed the bank. Once inside, Ratliff shoved money by the handful into his red Santa bag, while the others cornered the bank tellers and the citizens. Their plan, however, did not account for the dead bank robber award. This is Texas in the 1920s. The robbers had guns, but so did every other citizen in the town. Now, Frances had noticed Santa, and she yanked her mother's hand through the door. Her mother, Miss B.P. Blassingame, realized the danger as the robbers shouted, "Don't go anywhere!" The quick-thinking Miss Blassingame grabbed Frances and dashed through the next set of doors out into the alleyway. According to the Texas State Historical Foundation, Chief of Police G.E. Bedford and many townsfolk heard her cries. Fueled by both Texas pride and the promise of the bounty money, the town's many armed citizens rushed to the scene of the crime. Hill, one of our robbers, saw commotion outside and fired a shot through the window, ensuing a massive shootout and leaving the bank riddled with over 200 bullet holes, according to the Texas Bankers Association. 2 people were immediately killed and a few wounded, one of whom was Davis. The robbers bolted back to their car with a bag of money and 2 hostages, Laverne Comer and Emma Ray Robinson. According to the Big Country homepage, they were only 10 and 12 years old. This escape prompted the largest manhunt the state had ever seen. Townspeople and police followed on foot, horseback, and in cars, while Texas Rangers assisted by plane. The Texas Co-op Power stated that within moments, the getaway driver noticed a serious problem. No one had put gas in the car, and its tank was nearly empty. So the crew attempted to steal an Oldsmobile on the edge of the town. The unsuspecting 14-year-old driver, Woody Harris, pulled over to help a Santa in despair. The crew hopped out and held the family at gunpoint. They switched the money, hostages, and now unconscious and wounded Davis into the Oldsmobile. Ratliff jumped into the driver's seat, but the keys were gone. The clever Woody and the keys to the Oldsmobile were nowhere to be seen. There's no time to panic with the impending doom of the mob and the police on their tails, so the remaining three scrambled and sprinted back to their original car. Back behind the wheel, Ratliff sped off with Helms and Hill. But they forgot something. They left all their cash, their securities, both their hostages, and their own comrade Davis in the Oldsmobile. Now the only money that remains on the line is the bounty money. The three went on to steal 3 more cars until Ratliff was wounded and captured near South Bend. The last duo, Helms and Hill, continued on. An article in the Medium said they were weak, hungry, and exhausted. So when they were found in the woods in Graham, they didn't resist the arresting officer. The legal aftermath proved as dramatic as the crime, as it furthered the messy narrative of where the law ends and lawlessness begins. Davis died shortly after being recovered from the stalled Oldsmobile in a nearby Fort Worth hospital. Helms' biography, held by the Texas State Library and Archives Commission, said that he was sentenced to death by electrocution on September 6th in 1929. Ratliff was sentenced to life in prison, but upon hearing about Helms' execution, he decided to plead insanity. In October of 1929, Ratliff was transferred to Eastland County for the sanity hearing. However, while waiting for his hearing, Ratliff attempted escape and mortally wounded a jailer. The citizens had had enough. No longer inspired by the bounty, but only fueled with good old Texas rage, over 1,000 townsfolk stormed the jail where Ratliff was held. The Corsicana Light newspaper from that week recorded that the massive mob screamed, "Don't give him another chance to kill a good man." The jailer, E.P. Kilbourne, replied back, urging the people to let the law take its place. But they cried in return, "We want action, and we have waited long enough." The mob overpowered the jailer and ripped Ratliff from his cell. So Ratliff's fate was sealed, not by a judge, but by an angry mob, illustrating the grim face of Texan justice. The Corsicana Light noted that it took 2 tries, but the mob ultimately hanged Ratliff nude from a telephone pole where he stayed for 30 minutes until the justice of the peace declared him dead. This dark conclusion highlights how the law and lawlessness often coexisted and at times even worked hand in hand. The Santa Claus bank robbery quickly became a local and state legend. Its legacy is vital to the Texas story, not just as a memorable crime, but as a cautionary tale. It exposed the chaotic law and order dynamic of Texas and, for better or worse, helped shape justice in a time of crisis. Ratliff's death marked the last mob lynching in the state of Texas, according to the Historical Marker Database. It also exposed the problem of exchanging money for lives. In 1928, Texas Ranger Captain Frank Hammer criticized the bounty, saying this reward has aroused the greed and desire of a small group of men who have more love for money than for human life. It took time, but the bounty was eventually discontinued, and the Texas Bankers Association only offers money for intel on bank robbers these days. Looking back on that cold December day in 1927, who would have guessed that Santa Claus would have made such an impact on the waning days of the Wild West, turning a poorly planned bank robbery in a small Texas town into a chain of events that blurred the fragile line between lawmaker and lawbreaker, ultimately changing the course of history and putting Santa Claus on his own naughty list.
Our third speaker is Matthew Marquez, and the title of his speech is From the Borderlands to the Badge, How John Kingfisher Dominated the Texas Frontier.
The date is March 11th, 1884. Two old friends exit an opera house after seeing a show in a little town some of you may be familiar with, San Antonio, Texas. The two had just spent the whole day catching up, drinking a little bit, and enjoying the entertainment of a growing town. They decide to go to the intersection of Commerce and Soledad Streets, now a location for a hip new rooftop bar. Back in those days, however, this was a spot known as the Fatal Corner, a location known for its murders, despite it being the home of a popular vaudeville theater with new electric lights. The two walk into the owner's office, but before they're able to say a word, bang! A shot rings out, and a bullet flies into one of the men's bodies. Before either of them can reach for the guns at their sides, another bang, and another, and more, until these two men have been shot to death in a brutal ambush. One of the men had been murdered intentionally in an act of revenge for killing the former owner of that theater. The second man, however, was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. But this wasn't just a random guy off the streets. This was someone who lived his life by the gun on his hip. Someone who built a criminal career on cattle thievery and murder. And yet, when his body fell to the ground, a piece of metal fell with it. A sheriff's badge. Who was this unfortunate casualty lying dead on the ground? His name was John King Fisher, more commonly known just as King Fisher, one of the most notorious lawbreakers in Texas history. And yes, King was his real middle name, but I doubt his parents could have realized just how fitting it would be. He's primarily remembered for being a kingpin on the Texas borderlands, someone no one dared to cross for his skill with a gun. And yet, his story isn't one of an absurdly evil movie villain. It's a lot more complex than that. It's the story of a young man influenced by the lawless environment he lived in. It's the story of a criminal, but it's also the story of redemption. Above all, however, it's the story of a Texan, a product of his times, just like me and you. King Fisher was born in 1855 in Collin County, but his family would move a few different places before eventually settling down in Goliad. His mother died when he was only 2, and his father was gone for stretches of his childhood fighting in the Confederacy. As a result, he was left with a lot of freedom, and he began to settle in with some bad crowds. This era of Texas history is known as the gunfighter era, for a reason. It's the origin of our vision of a cowboy, and the reason folks from other states might expect us to have that funny hat with us everywhere we go. The Civil War left Texas in a time of Reconstruction and unprecedented freedom. Freedom for Texans to do whatever they pleased, including crime. Fisher was only 15 when he committed his first crime. He stole from a storehouse in Goliad and was arrested on October 5th, 1870. This would be his first real run-in with the law, but it would also be his first taste of freedom from it. The Texas governor pardoned him after just a few months on account of his extreme youth. For the first of many times, King Fisher would manage to evade a real jail sentence. This taste of freedom inspired Fisher to move to the Pendencia Creek in Dimmitt County and get himself a ranch. Now, it's important to realize what kind of an area the Pendencia Creek was at this time. It's a spot that was known for its lawlessness. It was a part of a region known as the Nueces Strip, a lawless region right next to the Mexican border. Its proximity to an easily crossable Rio Grande made it a popular spot for cattle rustling, because Texans and Mexicans could simply steal whatever they wanted on one side and cross the river to avoid punishment. Furthermore, according to historians Chuck Parsons and Thomas J. Bicknell, law enforcement in Dimmitt County was almost non-existent, and the court system of the nearby 24th District was ineffective. This lawless environment allowed King to build his criminal kingdom in the South. He began making forays into Mexico, stealing cattle, sometimes with a murder or two along the way, and returning back to his ranch with new loot. These cattle rustling trips were enough for him to earn his respect among the outlaws in the area. According to a descendant of King's, O.C. Fisher, his ranch was a sort of headquarters for renegades and thieves, with numbers of men reaching over 100, who were all loyal to the king and always available at his beck and call. Soon, O.C. wrote that he had established a virtual empire, and a wide area encompassing more than 3 counties soon became known as King Fisher's territory. It was becoming obvious to those in South Texas that he was not a man to be messed with. According to the Texas State Historical Association's website, there was a sign on the road leading to his ranch that proclaimed, "This is King Fisher's road. Take the other." Stories of murder spread, and his name became synonymous with a vicious murderer and a thief, which struck fear into the hearts of everyone across southern Texas. That was until the Texas Rangers stepped up. While previously the War Department had denied requests for aid along the border, stating that they had no authority to act in the area, a brave group of Rangers would organize to meet the challenge. In 1875, Ranger Leander McNelly and a small group of about 30 men were tasked with bringing the law back to the Nueces Strip. According to historian Walter Prescott Webb, no better man, probably, could be found for that job. Leander McNelly was a frail former soldier who had been infected with a brutal case of tuberculosis that would claim his life in a few short years, but he was still a respected captain with an undying passion for justice. The citizens along the Pendencia must have breathed a sigh of relief as McNelly, their ranger in shining armor, came to quell the lawlessness they had been subject to for years. Upon arriving to the region, McNelly quickly realized that if the lawlessness were to be quelled, that king would need to be dethroned. In a report sent to lawmakers in Austin, McNelly wrote that you can hardly realize the true conditions of this country. It is under a reign of terror from the men who infest this region. He said that 3,000 to 10,000 head of cattle were stolen every month by men led by none other than King Fisher. With only some guns, a small group of men with him, McNelly eventually encountered that road sign telling him to take the other road. McNelly didn't follow King's instructions. He would make the brave move of plunging directly into Fisher's territory and arresting him on June 3rd, 1876. McNelly and his men dashed for the house at full speed, 6 shooters in hand, demanding Fisher surrender or be killed. Fisher, recognizing that his wife was nearby, surrendered without bloodshed. This would be the first of several arrests he would face in the coming years, but he wouldn't stay in jail for long. He was set free after easily paying his bail, and when time for his trial came, he was acquitted because of a lack of evidence. His reputation and wealth made him unstoppable, a man who could murder or steal anything he pleased because witnesses were either too scared to testify against him or didn't live to tell the tale. In total, he was indicted 21 times, facing a jury 6 times, and each of those times ended in an acquittal. Except this reign of terror wouldn't last for long. When McNelly took him in, he gave Fisher some advice. He told him that if they came up to that ranch again, they'd come to kill, suggesting that he could make a better life for himself. Fisher took these words to heart. He was married to the love of his life, Sarah Vivian, and had 2 daughters with her. It was this growing family and a fear of being behind bars for his daughter's childhood that inspired a change within him. This change especially came after a brutal stint in none other than the San Antonio jail, known at the time as the Bat Cave. This wasn't a cool underground lair for Bruce Wayne. This was a jail known for its concerning conditions for prisoners. After enduring 9 painful months in that jail, he returned to his ranch with little desire for crime. He spoke with a priest after being released, who gave him some words of wisdom he would live by. He told him, "King, it'd be a lot better if you could be on the king's highway." For once, instead of taking King Fisher's road, King Fisher would take the other. After selling his ranch and getting out of the criminal business, he moved to Uvalde and turned to the other side of the law. He was appointed deputy sheriff of the town in 1882, and acting sheriff in 1883. The citizens of Uvalde loved him because he was good with a gun and he always kept him safe. Imagine that. An outlaw turned around by the love he had for his family, brandishing a sheriff's badge and fighting the people he used to recruit. He was prepared to win a landslide re-election in 1884, when bang, his life was cut short on that fateful day, just a few miles from where we are right now. King Fisher died a reformed man, a man infected by the freedom around him that was cured by the love for his family and the advice of a ranger. The citizens of Uvalde never saw him as an outlaw, and his funeral was the biggest held there up to that point. When you pass that former fatal corner, think about the man who died there. Think about how his notoriety led the Texas Rangers to come to the Nueces Strip and establish the law that makes sure another outlaw like Fisher never walks these streets again. But also, think about the man, the devoted husband, the sheriff protecting his community, and the Texan, just like me and you. Thank you.
Our fourth speaker is August Vinson, and the title of her speech is Meekness and Moonshine, the Tom Pinky Roden, the bootlegging king of West Texas.
Speckled throughout West Texas, RetroScript adorned signs and billboards describing Pinky's liquor store. Today, Pinky's sits casually next to the community theater and pizza place. But in the days after Prohibition, the only thing that sat next to Pinky's was the county line between wet and dry. The namesake of the corporation, Tom Pinky Roden, had created a bootlegging empire by the age of 16. He spent time in prison, paid off law enforcement, and is known as the father of the University of Texas Permian Basin. The reputation of West Texas is dusty cows, their handlers, and lawlessness. And there is no better advocate for that brash overgeneralization than rule-bender Pinky Roden. It takes a real agent of chaos to stir up representation for us West Texans in the Capitol. So today, we'll describe the life of Pinky Roden told in 3 pieces. First, the gray area businessman. Second, the legal lobbyist. And finally, some implications. Because this man who turned into a legal influencer defines West Texas tradition. The 6'3", red-headed, soft-spoken Tom Roden set foot in Odessa in 1938, opening 2 package stores by 1939, cheekily called Pinky's, after his lifelong nickname. You see, after the repeal of Prohibition in 1933, Texas reverted back to its 1887 ruling that counties could rule on that alcohol issue. Naturally, Pinky took himself on a tour about the plains, spreading his business model with lawmen and bootleggers alike. You see, just because the building was in a wet county, Pinky intentionally turned his eyes away from clientele making large purchases. He kept his nose out of where they were taking it. In 1952, Pinky had successfully waited for the Second World War to come and go, and with it, the discovery of oil wealth in the Permian Basin. Liquid gold cowboys acquired a taste for booze, and more wet counties started to flip throughout West Texas. By 51, Pinky ran stores out of Big Spring, Kahona, Mahonans, Carlsbad, San Angelo, and Menard. The crown jewel of the operation, however, sat in the middle of nowhere in Ector County, surrounded by inconspicuous 8-foot walls, and was called the Farm Store. The Farm Store boasted $8.5 million worth of sales in 1951 and became the crown jewel of Amarillo Grand Jury's indictment of Tom Roden in 1951. That's over $100 million worth of sales in today's money. An Amarillo grand jury indicted him. Subpoenas were issued, witnesses called to the stand as the Texas Crime Investigating Committee cracked down on the operation. Amarillo grand jury and the Texas Liquor Control Board found Pinky liable for bootlegging and large liquor operations, but they were unable to pursue prosecution because these days Pinky was only the name on the building and the financer. He was known to hold absolutely zero record stock in the company. With a reputation tainted and privacy invaded, Pinky decided that it was time to turn his focus to capital legislation. As a staunch Democrat and capitalist with deep pockets, Pinky began his tirade on Texas legislators for power and influence. In 1958, a grocery store owner in Asherton requested that liquor sales be made legal, not in the entirety of Dimmitt County, but only in the small community of Asherton, a request which lawmakers saw as unconstitutional. It was denied. However, the case made it all the way to the United States Supreme Court using the financial and political motivations of guess who? Pinky. By the autumn of 1959, Pinky successfully lobbied for a redefinition of where alcohol sales were and were not legal. Elections erupted across towns and cities and precincts, eventually passing just off of Highway 87, where Pinky set up his own shop on the outskirts of Lubbock. It also exploded in popularity, rivaling Las Vegas, and was kindly named the Strip. Pinky was able to block liquor sales by the drink-in saloons from 1963 to 1967. When he realized he could no longer fiend off the bars, he instead enlisted the help of the great Christian mothers of Abilene. We could not let liquor sales happen in grocery stores. Instead, we must persuade them only to happen in package stores like Pinky's. God forbid the children be exposed to such sin. In 1967, Pinky purchased the Lincoln Hotel in Odessa, remodeled it into the only full-service hotel in the Permian Basin, and renamed it Inn of the Golden West. Although gambling was never legal in Odessa, Pinky didn't care much and had enough connections not to. And a live game and excited crowd could be found atop the hotel at the Golden Rooster Club, live music flitting throughout the hallways. At this time, oil wealth had flowed out of the Permian Basin for going on 40 years. Yet no higher education institutions had ever been exposed in the area. The people of Midland and Odessa were calling for a branch of the University of Texas to be established, and Pinky got on the case immediately. As explained by the Los Angeles Times, Tom Roden acquired a tainted fortune, but used it mostly for noble and selfless ventures. Back at his home of operations, he advocated for the Black community and minority groups. His advocacy for Odessa continued into Texas legislators. The bill for the University of Texas Permian Basin failed in 1959 and 1961. So he enlisted help of professional lobbyist Bob Bullock in 1963. Where the bill once again died. By 1969, it was finally signed into law by Governor Preston Smith with the help of his personal head of staff and great friend of Pinky Roden, Bob Bullock. The university opened in 1972, named Pinky Roden as its father, and put his brother Bill on the Board of Regents. Today, a monument in Pinky's honor still stands at the Ector County Hall of Entrepreneurs, a monument, a testament to Pinky's devotion to helping underrepresented communities. A meek face and a well-planned hand ultimately led to the redefinition of liquor laws and West Texas tradition for 50 years. An impact like that simply doesn't go away. We see Pinky's work echoed into the modern day in two key implications. First, the redefinition of liquor laws, boozography, and second, West Texas's conservative tradition. First, Texas's boozy geography. Lubbock was known as the bootlegging capital of the world until the mid-1960s, when Pinky effectively pushed for the redefinition of where liquor laws were allowed to be instated. What started as a way for Pinky to price fix alcohol prices in Lubbock was the dawn of the most heavy-handed alcohol regulations in the country. As explained by the Texas Tribune, Texas is the only state in the country that prohibits publicly traded corporations, like Walmart or other large grocery stores, from holding liquor permits. Additionally, blue laws prevent the sale of alcohol on Sundays or after 9 p.m. other days of the week. All of these laws can be traced back to benefiting Pinky's business model. In addition to those, the law which defines where liquor can and cannot be sold still stands. Lubbock refused to go wet until 2009. As of 2024, there are 5 dry counties in Texas, all in the west. And there are sectors of Amarillo that still refuse to go completely wet. Second, West Texas's conservative tradition. The Panhandle and its adjoining land is known as the most accountably conservative part of the country, an area over the size of Wyoming and not a single blue county. While Pinky was a dedicated Democrat, his devotion to keeping some counties dry ultimately led to a division of Texas, separating the West from the rest of the state. As explained by the Austin American-Statesman, local liquor agencies pitted themselves against each other, ultimately advocating for some laws in Austin and others in Abilene. This was a way for Pinky to continue to keep some counties dry and profit from the bootlegging of alcohol into them, while others wet so that he had to travel not as far. These dry counties then established their moral superiority, reinstating Christian fundamentalism, individualism, and autonomy against the deep state, all pinnacles of dry counties and of cowboy conservatism. While these wet counties that Pinky advocated for developed into, drunken democratic wonderlands, the dry counties swung hard the other way to resist. Pinky defined West Texas tradition and liquor laws for 50 years. Using a meek face and a well-played hand, he made sure that Texas was once again completely unique. Pinky Roden defines that spirit by looking at first his job as a below-board entrepreneur turned legal lobbyist. We see his impact stretch from Big Bend County and beyond. Pinky ensured that Texas, just like his legendary reputation, could never be poured from a bottom shelf bottle.
Our final speaker of the day is Annette Adoyobo with her speech entitled Eloquent Thunder, Barbara Jordan and the Architecture of Justice.
If the walls of the Texas state capitol could talk, they would echo with Barbara Jordan's deep, commanding presence. A voice they made history and proved that when spoken with conviction, justice can shake even the marble pillars of power. It was 1966, and Texas politics was still more dusty boots than diversity. And into that stubborn world stepped a woman who didn't just make history, she shook its very core. Barbara Jordan, born in Houston's 5th Ward, became the first African American elected to the Texas Senate after Reconstruction. Later, she became the first Southern Black woman elected to the United States Congress. Now, before we embark on her journey to Washington, we must begin in Houston. On the porch, young Jordan, knees clutched, drawn to the radio. Not for music, but for the magic of the words that lit her young heart. One day, hearing Edith Sampson, one of the first Black women to argue before the U.S. Supreme Court, Barbara felt a lightning strike. She would become a lawyer. Now this was a wild and defiant dream for a young Black girl in segregated Texas. But Barbara Jordan was never one to turn down a bold dream. In 1956, she graduated from Texas Southern University, magna cum laude. Then she headed east to Boston University School of Law, where she was one of only 2 women in her entire class. She returned home to Houston in 1959 and opened up her law practice in her parents' home, using their dining room table as their primary workspace. And to supplement her income, she worked as an administrative assistant to County Judge Bill Elliott. Now, one might say that politics was in the air, or in the dust. Houston in the 1960s was changing fast. Civil rights marches, sit-ins, shifting power. Barbara Jordan realized that in order to change the law, she needed to make the law. So she ran for the Texas House of Representatives in 1962 and 1964, but lost both times. But here's the thing about Barbara Jordan. She never saw defeat as failure. In fact, each loss lit a fiercer fire inside of her. So in 1966, she ran again, this time for the Texas Senate. And she won. And when she took the oath of office in 1967, she stood in the very chamber that had once voted to secede from the Union and that had written Jim Crow into the state's DNA. She stood there as a Black woman from Houston's 5th Ward, ready to legislate. And in that chamber, she quickly proved her genius for building coalitions. She didn't storm down the doors of power. She opened them with logic, patience, and grace. In 1972, she became the first Black woman to preside over the Texas Senate. She co-sponsored or sponsored nearly 70 bills during her tenure, including legislation on minimum wage, anti-discrimination, and fair employment. And then came her call to Washington. In 1972, after Houston's 18th district became newly redistricted, Barbara Jordan ran for Congress and won. Now, this victory was more than symbolic. It was a sign that Texas was changing. And once in Congress, she did what few freshmen would ever do. She defined the moral tone of the institution. Her moment came in the summer of 1974 during the House Judiciary Committee hearings on the impeachment of President Richard Nixon. The country was weary, wounded by Watergate, and divided. But Barbara Jordan, seated in front of the committee with papers neatly in hand, began to speak. And I quote, "My faith in the Constitution is whole. It is complete. It is total. And I refuse to be an idle spectator to the diminution, the subversion, the destruction of the Constitution." Those words, that voice, rolled through America like thunder. Eloquent thunder. And suddenly, the daughter of a Baptist minister became the nation's conscience. She didn't attack or grandstand. Instead, she reminded people what the law and justice sounded like. Those words surged through living rooms, shaking hearts, and she reminded the nation that the laws and justice were sacred trusts, not tools for convenience. And I quote, "We, the people." It is an eloquent beginning. But when that document was completed on the 17th of September, 1787, I was not included in that. But through the process of amendment, interpretation, and court decision, I have finally been included in We, the People. After the dramatic Watergate hearings, Barbara Jordan turned her attention to ethics reform, voting rights, and social justice, which included expanding workers' compensation and bolstering the Voting Rights Act of 1965 to include coverage of Mexican Americans. Most notably, Barbara Jordan delivered a historic keynote address at the 1976 Democratic National Convention as the first African American and woman to do so. Her eloquent thunder emphasized American ideals, unity, equality, and accountability, that rallied notable support for the successful presidential campaign of Jimmy Carter. Barbara's health began to fail in the 1980s. Multiple sclerosis confined her to a wheelchair, but her spirit only grew stronger. She worked with some of the most powerful leaders in American government, including as the chairwoman of the United States Commission on Immigration Reform under President Bill Clinton, and as the ethics advisor to Governor Ann Richards. She became a professor at the Lyndon B. Johnson School of Public Affairs at the University of Texas, mentoring and paving the way for the next generation of leaders, including myself. Barbara Jordan passed away in 1996 from pneumonia and leukemia. She became the first Black woman to be buried in the Texas State Cemetery, the same resting grounds as Stephen F. Austin, Sam Houston, and other giants. This was a fitting honor, for Barbara Jordan was a giant who moved a nation. Texas history is filled with outlaws and lawmakers, with agents of chaos and architects of justice. Barbara Jordan was the rare soul who knew that true power doesn't come from bending the rules or breaking them to your will. True power comes from believing that justice, real, equal, constitutional justice, is worth protecting, even when it is unpopular. She built her legacy not on fiery rebellion, but on unshakable integrity. She didn't just speak truth to power, she embodied it. So today, as we look back on Barbara Jordan, we are reminded that the architects of justice aren't always the loudest or the boldest. Sometimes they are those who refuse to sit idle while the Constitution trembles. And that was the kind of Texan that Barbara Jordan was. One who taught that the law, when used rightly, can be the most powerful voice in the room. In the story of Texas, a state of lawmen and lawbreakers, Barbara Jordan stands as the voice that never wavered, the conscience that never cracked, the architect who built her justice on one word, one law, and one courageous act at a time. So to close in the words of former President Bill Clinton, as Barbara Jordan was to be laid to rest. She left a vivid air signed in her honor. We the people will miss you. We thank you, and Godspeed. Thank you.
Okay, so our president, Kathleen LaFleur, assisted by your university liaison chair, Kelly Anderson, will present certificates and checks to the 2nd through 5th place winners. The first place winner today will receive a certificate. However, the first place prize of $6,000 will be presented following their speech at the annual Battle of Flowers luncheon at the Mays Family Center here at the Whitty on Thursday, April 23rd during San Antonio's Fiesta Week. The following morning, riding on a beautifully decorated float through the streets of downtown, today's winner will be our honored guest in the 135th Battle of Flowers Parade, put on entirely by women. Okay, contestants, please come forward when I call your name, and please remain at the front of the room for a few photographs once we have all of the awards given. Our 5th place winner today is Ethan Montez from Southern Methodist University. And Ethan is taking home a $750 prize today. Our 4th place winner is Callie Leverett from Abilene Christian University, and she is taking home a $1,000 prize today. Our third place winner is August Vinson from West Texas A&M. And August is taking home a $1,500 prize today, and the university department of her faculty advisor is going to receive a $1,000 grant from the Battle of Flowers Association. Our second place winner is Matthew Marquez from Trinity University. And Matthew is taking home a $3,000 prize today, and the department of his faculty advisor will be receiving a $2,000 grant. Our first place winner today is Annette Adeyobo from Texas Tech University School of Law. Congratulations to all of you. I honestly don't know how our judges narrowed it down to 5, and I really did not envy them the decision of having to put you in order. I thought you were all fabulous, and I feel certain that everyone here enjoyed your speeches just as much as I did. This concludes the 2026 Battle of Flowers Association Oratorical Contest. We appreciate your attendance today, and we hope you enjoyed our program of outstanding contestants and speeches on Texas history. Mark your calendars for next year, especially the 5 of you. Well, except for Annette. We do have a rule. If you win, you can't come back. You're a ringer at that point. But mark your calendars for next year. It will be held on Friday, February 26, 2027, for our 2027 Oratorical Contest here at the Witte. Thank you all for joining us.